So, about micro frontend, or learn to stop worrying about because micro frontends has been a holy grail of mine. It's been very interesting, and we get some technologies every year or every now and then that actually helps us build them. So, who am I? The brief introduction. I'm a very valuable editor. Yes, I've been a developer for 12 years, and yeah, I think so. If I have to go to an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'm firstly going to introduce micro frontends as a basic concept, and then and why we should start using it more. Then I'm going to do a demo, and I'm going to talk a bit about the pitfalls with micro frontends and module federation. And lastly, I'm going to try to conclude about how the state of micro frontends and module federation is. So, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? We have the front-end scope that's increasing in size and complexity, and every year we get increasingly complex and hard to scale applications up and running. And it seems like the projects are getting bigger and more cumbersome to build every day. So how do we move to smaller code slices? How do we actually slice our code up so we have a more specified problem that we're trying to solve with our code? And how do we share it across an application or an enterprise? And also these smaller code slices, they can help to scale our teams. So how do we actually do that? How do we get a bigger scale on our teams instead of sitting one front-end team and trying to use all our time solving merge conflicts and actually solving a problem? So what are micro frontends? Are they front-end for ants? No. So micro frontends are integrated individual frontends. So it's on runtime, you'll get a frontend, and then you'll move it over to another host application. And that's pretty much it. That explains micro frontends, right? Well, there is a little bit more to it. So here in the history, we've been working in the olden days with single systems where we had integrated front-end and back-end. Everything was one big monolith that we worked out from, and all the code bases were collected, and we tried to solve all the problems. So then at some point, we started doing a split where we split the front end and the back end. And now we have, for example, a single page application and an API that we can call, and then we can exchange data that way. So that's the first split of the micro front-end move that we're going to. Then we moved on to microservices. The backend team said, well, we want to split our code even more. We want to have smaller slices with distinct responsibilities that we can then do in smaller code slices. And on the front end, we kind of fiddled our thumbs and thought, well, this single page application is actually working. Why change it? And here we are today. We're trying to do micro frontends. A lot of application or enterprises and guys have tried to do micro frontends. For example, Spotify. The Spotify app is a micro frontend. It's been used. It's been created with iframes and split out. So this is what I'm going to tell you about today, where we have a micro frontend. We have different distinctions of small frontends that we can manage, and we can focus on different parts of the application. So we don't have this big monolithic frontend that's going to take forever to build and is hard to manage, and we can now have different separated teams that can actually have one focus. And as I've said before, for a long time we've been working with monolithic frontends. So one of the things that it tries to do is that we're going to have these team compositions where you have a single team that focuses on a specific part of the application. So you could have a search team that's going to focus on only doing the search part of the application. You can have a dashboard team that focuses on doing the dashboard and actually digs into this problem and actually specializes in it. So they don't have to know the entire complexity of the application. You could have these smaller slices that you now can easily understand and specialize within. And that makes it so that you can have these where you can share knowledge between the front and back end database, and you can then split it up in different teams. So micro frontends talks about vertical splits, horizontal splits. So this is an example of a vertical split. So you have a shell application up here, and then you have different teams within that shell application that works on different parts of the application. The reason why it's called a vertical split is because you can draw lines vertically between the different parts of the app. So that way you can separate responsibility. You can have a shell application that can do routing between the different parts of the application, and that way you can try to solve some of the complexity by splitting it out to smaller pieces. A horizontal split is pretty much the same thing, but instead of having this shell application, you can draw some horizontal lines. So you will have different teams working on parts of the same page, and that way then import it into the micro frontend. And I'm gonna do a small demo of a horizontal split, a very simple horizontal split. Yeah. So what's some of the problems with micro frontends? Well, we are increasing in complexity. It becomes a more complex application. So you have to be better at plan stuff. You have to be better at organize stuff. So you are introducing some overhead into your application building, because you will have to now handle these different parts of the application that you're trying to bring in concurrently when you're hosting your app. We used to have a problem with bundle sizes, with sharing dependencies. Before, when we got things in via iframes, if you had a dependency, you had to bring it to each of the iframes because you had a very strong encapsulation of code. You couldn't share it between your different parts of the application. And that became a problem because it increases the bundle size, and all know we need to get that website out to people today. They need it within like a second or two. So bundle sizes are important. Also version conflicts. How are we handling it if we don't have this strong dependency encapsulation that we had with iframes. So that's one of the things that module federation is actually helping with. Module federation is a part of Webpack. It's one of the new features of Webpack 5. So it's new. I think it got released in November or December or something like 2020. So it's still relatively new on the market, and it's a part of a web that allows this sharing of modules. Now it helps you actually share it on runtime. And the other things that it does really well is dependency handling, because Webpack is one of the things where it's really good at bundling up your stuff and actually handling dependencies to different parts of the application. So what are we talking about when we are talking about module federation? Well, usually you're talking about a shell or a host application and a micro frontend, so a remote application. These two have each of their code, and as of right now, it doesn't have anything shared. So how might Well, one of the things that we can actually do is that we can import this new module federation plugin into our Webpack. And it's pretty simple. It's a couple of things that you need to declare. You need to declare what is this host application named, where is it getting its code from, so what are the remotes that it's fetching code, and then what dependencies are shared from this. And that's pretty much it for the host application. If you set this up, it's ready to get the data from the remote. And here we see that we need to specify the name also. It's called app2, and that's what the remote is pointing to at the host application. We have a file name for this module federation, which is a manifest of the elements that module federation is actually sharing between the different parts. So you'll get this remote entry, which is a big list of what is shared and what dependencies am I requiring to run and everything. So it's nothing that you would ever look in normally. It's not something that Webpack would be able to fetch when it's trying to actually get the data from the other one. Then right below it, it has the exposes point, which is what part of this application does it want to expose to other module or micro-frontends. And in this example, we're going to do a micro frontend, so a MFE, and it's pretty much the name and then the location of the file that we want to share. And this one also says that it needs React to run this component, and it needs it to be a singleton. So one really awesome things about this is this dependency version handling. And it has three main topics or subjects. It has semantic versioning. It has either a fallback or a singleton way of handling the code. And what it does is that it tries to get all the dependencies and manage it in the best way possible. So for example, with this semantic versioning, you can get 3 module federation or micro frontends that has a requirement for this example lib. And if you have specified it to share it, Then the container and the micro frontend 1 will try to share the major version, so 5.1.0, and it will try to get the highest possible version. And as MFE2 doesn't share the main version, it has a 4.00, it will fall back to its own version, so that will actually get loaded dynamically. You won't have to do anything. If you do a singleton, for example, React, the application is not happy about running several instances of React at the same time. So you'd probably set that to be a singleton. And if you set it to be a strict version, then if it tries to get the code and it sees that the version mismatches, it will fail, and it will fail hard and don't render anything. So that way you'll get a little bit of help when actually developing it to see that you have a singleton mismatch. You can do a required version or a relaxed version where you say, okay, I know this library is going to work between these versions because I'm only using the main functionality and not some of the newly discovered super functionality. So I just need it somewhere between here. And
so no hello Aarhus.js.
No hello Aarhus.js. Yes, I think we can use hello Aarhus.js from anything to anything. Yes, it will always work. No. So I'm going to do an example, and I'm going to be building two apps, a host and a remote. These here two apps will be React apps with shared dependencies, so they'll share the React and React DOM with each other. So we won't have to actually load that twice. We'll only load it once, and then it will work with the things from the remote. The host will consume the remote, so we will get React component, a little stupid React component that we are gonna code today, and it'll take a copy and then consume it in the host. And that is what we hopefully will get through today. So I'll just do a directory. Yeah. Have the backup projects ready. And in here, we will try to do...
I think you made a typo when you made the directory.
Moldu, yes. And what we'll do in here is that we'll do in MPX, create MFApp, and it's just a small helper. Should have internet, otherwise this will be a yes. So first we have to specify our name of the application. We will call it host. We'll have an application hosted on CoreForce. It will be a React application, and it will use TypeScript and CSS. And we also need a remote application. We'll call it MFE1. It's also an application, and it's set up the same way, so TypeScript. One, and install. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to try to create a simple React, and we'll try to look at the the Webpack configuration and see what's needed. So here we can see that we have the host and we have the module federation application. So this is the remote. The create MF app pretty much creates all that we need to do a module federation example. So it does this Webpack config, sets up the package JSON with the correct name and all the things that you need. So let's start with doing the little React component. And we are gonna import this from React. Never do live coding. Yeah. Can you see it now? And so we're gonna do a small div where we'll say hi, yes, or hi, and then we will use props. Then we can do it later. We'll do a small style for this, just so we can see that it's actually this being integrated. And yeah, hopefully this will work. We can try to pull it in here. And then we're gonna do a terminal. Did I already do that? Otherwise, yeah. npm start. So now we're gonna start up the Webpack, and we can see here that we have this little application where we see the name, the framework, and the CSS. And then we have the React component that we've already created, which is hi Aarhus.js. And that's our remote. If we go into the host, let's do a terminal for the host. And we're just gonna install it and then see it without that it's actually not having the part from the remote. So now we have it in the remote, and this is the host, and it just says name host and React. So now we can go and do some of the interesting stuff with the module federation. So because this is the remote, we need to set what it exposes. And we want to share this hello module frontend that we created. And so this is just the name for what we are going to expose. So that's what Webpack sees that we're exposing. And then we need to say where is the where is the component that we're exposing out.
It's called one, isn't it?
Yeah. Hello, MFE1. Yes, thank you. So now we have this, and we won't be needing this anymore. So now we just need to restart the Webpack configuration, because when we do changes into the Webpack configuration, it needs to be reserved. We now have the host where we'd like to import this part, and we need to tell Webpack where to find it first. And the way we do this is that we go into the Webpack config for the host, and it says that it has remotes, and we have the MFE1 remote, and in MFE1 we then need to get where it's hosted, so we can point to it through the host, and then we're going to get the remote entry. So this tells Module Federation where to find the code and what code is there, and how to get it generally. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to go to app, and then we are going to import hello MFE, from, and then we can specify MFE1 / hello MFE. And that will make me able to import it here. And then we can take and put in the props that we know that we need. Hi hours.js from host. Then we need to rebuild the, that was this one. We need to rebuild the Webpack configuration and start the server again. And of course, we have a problem.
I think you missed the one again.
Oh, the one. Hello, MFE1. Yes. Yes, now it works. And as you can see, it's imported from from the remote with the red border, and everything works. So because it's runtime imported, at build time, we don't really know that much about it. So TypeScript is not that fond of it getting some JavaScript code in that it doesn't really know what type it is and what dependencies or props it needs. So we can solve this with just doing a declaration file and then doing the declaration for hello MFE. We can mfe1.d.ts, and then here we can clear a module. It's called MFE1 hello MFE. And now it should be happy, but what I really did was just tell it that it's a module. So now TypeScript is happy, but we're not any further. I could begin doing the typing of actually showing what types it has here and declare it. One of the things that you could do is actually do some sharing. So sharing of the TypeScript, but I'll get into that later. So now we did the two parts. We have the remote and we have the host. We shared the remote code, the host, and are there any problems with this? Yes, there are several problems still. Global styles is just imported into your application as they were native. So they will override your styles. So if some other team just decided that the body tag should have a blinking red background, your body tag will now have a blinking red background when you import this through Module Federation. This is an awesome thing, but it's also a thing that you need to be a little bit wary about and actually think about how you're doing the importing of the styles. So one of the things you can do is use unique naming, BEM modifiers, or some other handling of CSS. Don't declare just global styles out of nothing. As I said before, Module Federation don't really deploy any type information for TypeScript because you won't have it at build time. You'll frontends available at runtime, so there's no way for it to know about it. One of the solutions is to do a contract between the different micro frontends, so whatever they're exposing. One thing you might do is do a awesome utility lib that you could share through GitHub NPM packages and whatever you want. But the important thing is that you need to make a contract, and you need to make sure that some other guy in some other team don't just change some part of your of their code, because if it fails on your side because you don't know what dependencies there are now, well, then it brings down your whole page and everything stops working. It does bring in a lot of complexity. You bring in a lot of complexity into the run when you try to do these micro frontends. You can do these awesome scaling things, and you can put people on different teams and all that. But you really need to be wary about all the contracts between the different parts, because at runtime, it's gonna work as one functional app, and right now there isn't that much tooling to actually help you do that. It's being developed though, so it will probably be better in the future. Module Federation is still early. It just got released for a year or two back, and there aren't that many standards yet for it. One thing you can do to actually try to save some of the contracts is you can do error boundaries, or try to handle it on your own. So if you get an error, then you'll do a fallback to some component. It isn't an optimal way of handling it, but it will make sure that if some other guy on some other team changes something, your part of the application doesn't just break. What you really should do is do these contracts and do all the managerial overhead of having several teams running at the same time. So a rough checklist for if you should consider doing micro frontends. So micro frontends isn't for everyone. If you're gonna do a small project, probably doesn't make sense to implement this extra complexity into the mix. Just do a monolithic front end and back end and get it done with. But if you have a huge team or you're working with multiple teams on the same project, then micro frontend starts being more sensible, because you're gonna have huge runtime builds, and you're gonna or build times, and you're gonna want to divide this between different teams that have each of their responsibility. Another example of where it could be a good idea is if you have different toolings and technology. If your company just acquired a huge React team and your app is made in Angular, well, you might want to do the technology agnostic thing and make it so that module federation handles the shift between Angular and React. So you could have all of your old Angular code, and then you could have the new code made in React, and it works seamlessly. You need to do some shims and other workarounds, but on the other hand, from a user perspective, they wouldn't be the wiser with the change.
Keep jQuery.
Yeah, exactly. That's the dream, right? Keeping jQuery. So the conclusion is we can do team scalability. We can easily scale up multiple teams. We can slice up our application in different parts, and then we can assign the different teams different parts of the project. And that's gonna help scale this. And that is probably the main feature of micro frontends. It's you can do tactical delivery. You can focus on specific parts of the app. You can actually deploy your dashboard page. If that's a single micro frontend, then you can update that if you have a deployment cycle that's every week, and the other parts of the app is every second week. You could actually make that work. So you could have a continuous integration pipeline that makes it so that the dashboard team has a sprint of 1 week and the other teams has 2. So that way you don't have to wait for the other teams to get ready with their stuff. You can just update yours if you make sure that the contracts are upheld. It's highly reusable. You can reuse the parts of the micro frontend that you're creating, and you can do it to different apps. You can do an app that has a styling one way, and you can have another one that has a styling another way. So it's in the mindset of doing these frameworks and doing the scaling and really reusability of components. We're technology agnostic. We can use, if you want to use React on one page and you want to use jQuery on another page, you can do that. It's up to you. So the sky's the limit. But if you do it, well, you do have to import that huge jQuery file and increase the bundle. So you probably want to stick to one framework, which is not jQuery. Yeah.
So close.
I don't have some awesome small Lego men, but thank you for listening.
If there's any questions for Nils?
Yes.
You said something about the styling always being global. How do you handle styling between different remotes if they actually need to have the same look and feel? And
So that's one of the awesome things about, well, the styling can be global. You can do the shadow DOM thing where you contain it within your applications, but if you set global styles, it will be application-wide. So you could do the thing where you have a shell application that handles all the global styles for the different parts. If you need to do a consistent look and feel, you could do that, but it's also an overhead of, well, agreeing on how things should look and then setting the global styles one place. You could do it that way, or otherwise you can say that this part is actually the one that handles the global styles, and then they will import everything. Otherwise, you can do the anarchy thing and just put in global styles everywhere, and if you push a new page, then it will load everything, and your header and footer will look different. But it's one of the things where it's very hard to do without just agreeing on some way that you're moving around or moving forward. I think we had a question down there. Yeah, hi there.
My question is regarding the headache of versioning. So you talk about how everyone should be on the same page and contracts and I don't know what. So my real question is, isn't it easier to just use like components, make them like as a dependency or something like that, and then have each of these micro frontends actually being built? I heard you say something about it will take longer time to compile it because it will be compiled into the application. But in my understanding, it's much easier to keep track of everything and not be put down because someone made a global thing that you didn't notice.
Yeah.
You updated there.
Yeah. So that's one of the things. Well, that was one of the headaches I've had with doing micro frontends. I mean, it was a very, very nice thing because I've been part of a project where we were sitting here in Denmark and we had another part of the micro frontend in Paris. So what we could do is that we could focus on our part, and the only time when we had to do the exchange of contracts and stuff like that with the other part was in the beginning, and then when we handed it over. But we were contained for our own team, so you'd have this possibility to actually do it yourself, and you do increase the complexity by having these small things and not having it integrated, all of it. But if you want to split things up and have it more contained, well, then micro frontends is actually a great way to do it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it's okay. My second question is regarding like global states. So imagine you have a shop and you have a cart, you have some products, and something is from one front end, one micro front end, and something from somewhere else. So how are you? Maybe I'm missing something. How are you binding these two things together?
So micro frontends don't have to be a UI components. You could do a Redux or some Veto or something. I think is actually a state management system built for micro frontends. So there are actually some solutions out there that's going to do state management and handling that for you. So you could do that as a micro frontend for itself. So you don't have to actually put in UI components. It's just the way that it's more easier to see when I'm demoing it up here that it is actually a UI component being moved over. But it could be a class and could be.
And then using props, you will be able to send what's in the card, for example, to a card UI component.
Yeah, exactly. You'd load it up and then you'd be able to actually access the state from where you are, because it'll just be imported into your application as a native part of it. So yeah.
So you talked about the independent release cycles and so on. So if I load up the application and I get version 1 of your beautiful front end, and you deploy a second version later on, does it have a way to reload parts of the application, or like do I need to do a browser refresh to fetch the new one, or how does it have any mechanics or anything?
Yeah, so everything that you're working on in your part of the code, it'll dynamically refresh because it's just React and stuff like that. But if you are working on another part that you're importing, if they changed something, you would need to refresh the page.
Yeah,
but
and I guess also for the end user, you know, they don't get automatic updates moving back and forth between pages.
well, if you deploy a new version, then that version is what's gonna be consumed by the application.
I was just saying, like if you have the dashboards page and I load that, I get the first version of it. I go somewhere else in the application as a user. Your team happens to deploy a new version of the dashboard.
Yeah.
And I navigate back. Can I request a new version of it, or how does
Yeah,
it work at runtime?
if you do a runtime, or if you do a page refresh, you need to do a page refresh to actually load the other. But if you have the single page application, the module is already loaded and it will work with the old version.
Okay, sure.
So you'd need to do a page reload, but I think that's probably what you would want to do, that you would have the same version that you started out with, and then if you do a page reload, it tries to get the entire application again.
Sure. Also, the state management thing is going to be interesting if you reload the state
Yeah,
management in the
yeah,
application.
live, yeah, yeah.
Where is the front link happening? Is it in each of the microfrontends? So you will have like, let's say, 5 microfrontends, 5 different webpack configs and so on.
Yes. You would have a remote webpack config for each of them. So if you have 5, let's just say that we are going to do this vertical slice, and we have different pages, which is our micro frontend. Well, then each page would have their own in there. So you could do lazy loading of those when you change the route, and then you could fetch the code then. You would need to get the remote entry on page load, so when you load up the host app, then it will get the manifest for all the other remotes that you have. And then when you go into it, it will try to load in dependencies, see which one it has, and load the other ones that it doesn't, and also load your code then. So it's a pretty lightweight way of doing things. But you would need to have a webpack config for each of the remotes that you have. Yes?
Does that mean that every remote needs their own URL as well? And you need to have then one for production, one for development, and
Yes.
the other?
Yeah, you would probably, what you would do, right now I showed the public URL in the webpack config. What you would do is that you would probably have a config file someplace that would load in, is this, what space is this loaded into? Is it deployment, development or staging or production? And then based on that, it would set a different public path. But what you can do is actually upload your bundled together modules and then put it up on an asset store like AVS, and it can load it from there.
That makes more sense, I guess.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes?
Yeah, so back to the question regarding state management. I was wondering, so for instance, you pass the data through props, let's say to the microfrontend you build, and then what? You want eventually to avoid for drilling, like, let's say about the user. You want to keep the user authenticated and avoid making requests to get user every time. So you send it through props, and then do you have to pass again the props everywhere, or you initialize the context, or what do you do about here? Like every microfrontend should initialize another state management with the values you send to props, or how does this work?
So what you would do is usually what the authentication and state management of the authentication of the user is, that you have this host application, and then that usually just authenticates the user. So you'd have that state between all your modules. It's more or less, you should think of it as lazy loading new components or modules into your web page as you use them. So you just do it in runtime instead of build time. And that way you wouldn't have to authenticate every time you load up a new micro frontend, but you would have it stored in the session that you're running right now. So that will handle it.
Yeah. The user was more of an example, but in general, like the state, you want to store some information.
Yeah.
And how do you keep this information inside the micro frontend without doing prop drilling?
So what I've done was that I showed a host application that consumes a remote. You can also do bidirectional, so you can say that the remotes actually consumes a micro frontend, so you could have those consuming the state component.
Okay.
So that way you would have a single state component that you could use and bring in.
Another question is, I guess you use some sort of documentation, like storybook or something like this. Do you write stories for each micro frontend and combine them all together, or do you write them inside shell application, or how does this happen?
So what you would do is, I can show you. So this is a independently hosted page. So this is not what I want the user to load. I want the user to load this host app. And as you can see, the styling from the remote app is actually brought over into the host app. So the only problem is when you try to do global styling. Global styling will also be consumed. So if you have a routing and you then had another page and you loaded a remote, then it would load the global styles from that too. So if I suddenly set on the remote that your body tag should be blinking, then it will actually start blinking on your app, but it wouldn't do it until I loaded it.
But I'm asking something different. Like, you usually have a team of developers working on the project, and like they can see, okay, I have this component already implemented in micro frontend 1. Let me somehow use it in micro frontend 2.
Yeah.
And from what I know, most of the companies use storybook, and they write like stories for each component, and everyone starts with storybook and sees the documentation.
Yeah.
Is there a way to combine everything from all the micro frontends into one storybook, or
So
workaround?
I know that the storybook isn't really the favorite thing to be consumed by Module Federation right now. So it's one of the things that we're working on. But there are some strategies out there on the internet. It's just finding out what people are doing, because
you can even combine storybooks into one. Like you can have different instances of storybook running and combine them into one.
Yeah.
You pass the URL for my friends.
Yeah.
All right.
Last question.
Last question then.
Yes.
Yeah.
One quick question is a little bit similar to the global styles. Then I guess you also have, if you consider custom elements like web components, right? They are also sort of registered in a global fashion in the custom elements registry in the browser, right?
Yeah.
Are there any like nice ways of working around that if you have a web component library that has major changes or something where you want to in the remote wants to use one version and in the host wants to use another version of that without overriding what is happening in the global
Yeah.
registry?
So it's probably something I would just handle with the different I would handle the complexity on a managerial level. So I would like agree on let's do it here or let's do it here, and then you're responsible for that web component instead of trying to load it multiple times.
Yeah.
I have another answer to that question.
Oh yeah, yeah, Philip.
There's a spec for scope registries, and there's a polyfill for that. So I would probably use the polyfill.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. great.
Awesome.
That I would do that too. Yes. Exactly. I was just coming to that. Yes. Yeah. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much.